don't neglect your foundations. Don't neglect your fundamentals. Don't try to run before you can walk. If you don't have a solid grasp on how EV functions, on which factors truly determine which of your plays on offer is likely to be best, then you're going to be on the wrong trajectory. Today's student is a chap called Shane. He plays 25NL on ACR Blitz. And the main thing I found myself saying time and time again throughout this coaching session, which we actually did over 2 different sessions. The pool was like blood from a stone, man. That pool is so nitty. So we recorded on like the Friday and then again on the Tuesday. And on both days, I found myself just saying, there are too many things in your thought process. There are too many distracting, unnecessary, fancy sounding, but ultimately somewhat hollow thoughts that aren't related to the EV choice in front of you. This is a common leak. My prescription in these cases is start with grade 1 of the Carrot Poker School. Shane was a little bit taken aback at the end of the session because I actually told him, go back and watch grade 1, watch the True EV series on the subscription service. If you want all of this, by the way, in one bundle, everything we've ever done and everything we put out in the subscription service in future, get the Golden Carrot Pass, full access to Carrot Corner. That's the way to do it. But yeah, I often see this where students have taken in too much information before their game can support it, especially their in-game thought process can support it. I think that's what's happened in this case, and there's some really cool spots to illustrate this. Our feature hand today is all about just folding a bluff catcher that looks good in a spot that's really underbluffed and understanding how to spot those so that you're not stationing off with good absolute hand strength but poor relative hand strength. All right, guys, hope you enjoy the video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are back today with another episode of Poker Friday. How did that feel, Shane, to be shouted at like that right at the start of our session? You've just met me. I'm screaming at you.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad actually, because I had to turn my volume down because the system volume's already loud enough, so
that's good.
Not too bad.
I was trying to get you with like a sudden shock to the system, like a quick blow at the start of the session here. So we've got some 25NL on ACR. We've got some Blitz poker. What's this game like? Is this your normal game? Tell us a little bit about you before we play.
Yeah, so I've just been working on my game a lot, so I just want to play as many hands as possible. So I wanted to be in a pool that just would allow me to try some new stuff, not cost me too much money if I don't do well. Overall, the pool is pretty mixed. There's some heavy regs that are just here playing all day long every day. Some are decent, most are not. A lot of people who just pop in here and there. Say overall, it's kind of a standard 25NL pool. If you look at the mass data for it, it's about appropriate when it comes to like bluffing, under check raising.
Cool.
Yeah, standard.
All right, we'll get into other pool reads as we go. Let's hit that I am back button and we'll play some poker.
Decent local guys. But for one, I may as well. Decent flop. Leads. Still no leads. Yeah. Fuck it, whatever. The same time on this. I think we need to talk about on that.
Okay, all right. So I didn't quite catch what you said during the hand. Did you say no leads here? Is that what you said?
I meant no leads with my hand. I just thought multi-way. Sure, there's an option I could polarize with this hand against 2 villains. Just think I'm sort of wasting effort doing that. I guess after check around once and twice by SB, I could start to do leads. Yeah, I just didn't feel need to invest in this.
Okay, so so the size of the pot, on its own isn't going to have anything to do with whether we should invest or not. But the risk reward should have something to do with that. So when the pot's small, everything you're betting is small as well, right? It's not like you're betting 6 times the pot. So for you to lead for like, I don't know, B75 or 66% pot or something like that here, let's just entertain a sizing like that. What would be the purpose? Like, what would be the aim in theory of like leading this hand?
Yeah, building a pot.
Well, it says 5 high, right? So usually you're going to have 5 high by the river. You do have some outs, but that wouldn't be the main purpose. Main purpose, yeah, main purpose would be bluffing. So
yeah,
right off the bat, when you have an air hand, try to switch into a mode where you're thinking, how good is bluffing, right? Like there's always a primary reason for betting. It could be value or it could be bluffing, but there's nothing else. There's no other reason. So when we have a hand on the turn or river that's betting for value, we want to think, right, how strong is our hand and can we build the, like, how big do we want to make this pot? What's our equity like? What sizing's appropriate? And when we're bluffing, it's more bang for buck, risk reward. If I bet 3 here, what's my fold equity like? Do I have pot equity to go with that? There's an inverse correlation, right? So the more draws you have, the more improvability or outs you have, the less fold equity you're going to need. So when it checks round in a 3-way pot, what do you think your fold equity is like here if you were to lead, say, half pot or 2/3 pot or something? How good is it?
pretty high.
Pretty high. So you're misframing the purpose of betting naturally here when you're in the hand. You're thinking about value betting and you're saying, oh, my hand isn't that good. I don't really want to build the pot. But you've selected the wrong candidate reason, I think, for betting in the first place. So with 5 high, bluffing's your candidate reason. How good is bluffing? How good is fold equity? And then the more that bailout equity you've got, the more outs you've got, right? Particularly when it's outs to the nuts, the better that's going to become. So I'm already detecting that you might struggle with autopilot and you might have generalized too many decisions that are actually important as not important. And that's like a very early prediction by me, and it may turn out to be wrong. But I'm going to make that prediction, and you can tell me if you think I'm wrong, and we can go through the session and see.
You're probably not wrong.
All right, cool. So I think leading turn is actually best here because if you check, the realizability is not going to be fantastic, right? Like I think fold equity is just very good in this spot, even though you are 3-way. I still think fold equity is really good for a lead. And yeah, I think check raise is not fantastic on the 6 because a decent part of betting ranges will be 6x now. And I think check call doesn't make much sense either with like no showdown value and being out of position, not being able to bluff the river if button bets, for example. I think I prefer just leading as my mode of investment, as a bluff, as a semi bluff, and that should be on our radar for sure in a spot like this. So probably you don't probe turn enough from this hand, and probably you should probe turn more, would be my initial prediction. But yeah, let's see what else we can unearth here and jump back in.
Times raise. Well, no raise for sure. Raise like 8s plus. Call 3 bet. Call 4 bet. It's big. No, it's not. It's fair size. Call. Wow. Okay. I would have a raising range. I don't think my hand needs to do it because I have still plenty of outs. I could consider shove, but think unnecessary. Just have too many outs. And I might even be ahead. Now I'm in trouble.
It stresses me out when people time bank like that down to 1 second, like I nearly have a heart attack. You can't see me right now, the audience can, but I'm like sitting here nearly dying in my chair.
I don't think I would have jams on an ace turn. I think pretty high up to realize. I think he has kings and queens here, which are not folding to the bet. So I think okay to check. Puts me in a bad position on river, but I think that's what happens. Interesting. I think he's pretty weak, but I only have kind of one play here. I can't bet 15, so it's just all in or fold. So Block diamonds. Go for it. Do it. All with kings. All with kings. Yes. Oh, okay. Oh,
Okay, let's talk about this one. Interesting hand. Okay, so we 3-bet nines. We get 4-bet, we peel the 4-bet. I think jam is probably a thing at equilibrium, but might underperform against pool because they're just going to be a bit more value happy. So getting it in pre going to be less valuable. There'll be less fold equity, less denial to get, that sort of thing. We get the ace of diamonds turn here after we've called the flop c-bet. And I think you said something like we're not playing jams on this node, so we have to check. What do you also said you think villain's calling kings, queens, etc. So if you did jam here, it'd be as a bluff. Would be asking villain to fold, I guess, queens, no diamond, kings, no diamond. They might fold those. I do suspect that this is not a massively high fold equity spot at these stakes at SPR1. Like, I don't think we're doing amazingly for fold equity here. I guess we should therefore be checking. A smaller bet isn't out of the question to me. Now, I don't think I would reopen with this hand. I think this hand just wants to check, but something you said on river, if we navigate to river here, where you said his range is weak. You think he's weak, but you can't bet small. I want to prod you a little bit more on that. Why could you not bet small here? I'm not saying I think it's right to bet small, but like, why is it not an option?
I think calling a 4-bet, my range is pretty funneled into strong hands at this point. So I've called his flop bet. I've called his 4-bet pre. I don't think we have a ton of bluffs, so I think it's like largely weighted to value. I'm kind of talking myself into a small bet here, but
I'm not really seeing the correlation between what you're saying and like whether you should small bet or not. Like, I'm not really understanding why what your range is affecting how good you think small bet is compared with big bet. Because
to me, I feel like small bet is if he's, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, to be honest. I think like
you've got to
small bet.
simplify your thought process, right? What we're doing here is kind of not related enough to EV. So let's just simplify it. You're value betting the river, right? That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we're trying to decide whether it's higher EV to go smaller or higher EV to jam. That's going to be the heart and soul of this spot. It's a very exploitative spot because it's an extremely like difficult situation to be anything near balanced or GTO in for either player. So nobody is going to be anywhere near anything theoretical here. And while it's true that like most of the hands you want to value bet the river with here are like straights or flushes or something, and they're probably just jamming, that doesn't mean that we don't have the option of small betting if we think it's higher EV. I actually don't think it's higher EV. I think jam is right because I think the pool is likely to call with 2 pair in this spot, maybe even 1 pair sometimes, a set, hands like this. And I think there's a lot of quite high absolute hand strength hands in villain's range that are calling all in. Like, I don't think it's like that surprising we get called here. And at SPR1, you are going to get called by like a bunch of stuff. But if, for example, you did think that the villain's range was really, really weak, and you did have a read that they were always folding to jam with most of their range, then you could build a small bet. There's nothing that prohibits it here, right? So just because the SPR is 1 doesn't mean that we can't entertain the idea of betting third pot. Like, we can, but I think at these stakes, like, we're good just shoving and still being called by a lot of 2 pair, some 1 pair, some sets, that sort of thing. But I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out where you're coming from, and I'm not really understanding your thought process and how it relates to what's best. I feel like you're thinking about a lot of things that aren't related to like what the best play is. And my main concern so far with your game is that you're trying too hard to complicate things when you should be simplifying things. And I think less is more. So let's work on getting simpler thought processes. Like, if we're considering block betting the river, why could that be better than all in? Well, it'd be better than all in if villain was calling it far more often than they were calling all in. They would have to be calling it like really, really far more often, right? For it to be better because you're winning less money. Why would all in be good? Because you're winning more money. They don't have to call us often. Then we're just trying to weigh up that like how big we're going compared with how often we expect to be called. That's really like all it comes down to in this spot. But I like the way you played it. I think you played it well. But yeah, keep it simple.
Got it.
Cool. Right, let's jump back in.
Okay. All right, Jack 5 deuce. So we have all Jack X in range. I've been trialing a lot more check recently and doing a lot more bigger bets on turn. I don't think this is appropriate given that we have some equity here with showdown value of the 5. I don't think we need to push equity. I think we're okay to check and call. I think nothing other than a call here. Interesting. So he hasn't filtered yet, which means he has all pocket pairs. I don't think I have a value bet with 5s, and I don't think I need to bluff because he still has hands like king, queen, queen 10. So I think this is just a check back.
Yep. Seems good. Let's have a quick chat about it. All right, so just talk me through the game plan on flop. Are you playing smaller bets, bigger bets in this spot? What's the overall sort of approach to these in position 3-bet pots?
So I have both sizes. Not on this flop, I'd be using a small size, given that it's like high card, low, low. I have all Jack X in range, so I could be pushing equity with like queens or ace jack. So I think that serves best with like a small bet. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think you can probably go either way. I think Solver will in position use more small bet here, out of position maybe more big bet. But yeah, I think both are totally fine. I just wondered what your approach was. And this is definitely a board you can bet at very high frequency. As for Ace 5 itself, what do you think about the viability of betting this hand?
Think just sort of unnecessary. So we still have we have decent amount of equity. If I'm guessing our equity, maybe 55, given that we're in position. We have the betting lead, though we're giving it up. Yeah, I still think we have a decent amount of equity. We don't want to bludgeon the pot up with like a middle equity
Okay.
type hand.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I thought your thought process was. So a bit of coaching on this then. Hands have investment ceilings, which we want to respect, right? So it's definitely right that with our pairs, we don't want to be, blasting flop and turn. Like if we had pocket nines here, we don't want to be like betting flop and blasting turn really big on a 10, probably. So we want to respect that polarization, but betting small with ace 5 on the flop is not a polarization mistake. That's not going to violate polarization yet, as long as we don't follow it up with another big bet on the turn. So betting the flop is fine with this hand. It's going to happen at a very high frequency in theory, and it's also okay to check, right? It's not a problem, but the way you're thinking about the spot can be improved, because when you bet small with ace 5, you get some really useful fold equity, you get villain to call with some hands that are pretty dead sometimes as well, like ace queen, whatever, and you have the possibility of binking trip 5s or 2-pair, both of which are very, very strong implied odds hands in this spot. So when you're on the flop, you don't yet need to lock yourself into this, like, I'm checking the middle, I'm polarizing, I'm playing a hyperpolar strategy. You can just bet a low, vulnerable-ish pair on the board here that has improvability, that likes fold equity, that gets called by some worse. There's nothing wrong with betting this hand, right? As long as you don't then follow it up with tons of aggression later. The final thing I want to add here, though, is that if the turn is favorable for your range and like degrading the villain's pocket pairs, especially, then you can actually bluff a pair of 5s and should bluff a pair of 5s on like a queen turn, a king turn, a 10 turn, that kind of thing. So this hand does actually double barrel like many textures as like a protection slash semi bluff type combo. As played, when you do check the flop on the turn, if we can just go to the turn, please. So villain leads here, right? Can I see
Yes.
his bet? So he goes like half pot. Yeah, just a call. Miles ahead of bluffs. No need to raise here. This is where polarization would come in. So if you did raise here, this is where you would be violating polarization in a major way and playing really horribly. But on flop, you're not doing that by betting 1/3 pot. See the difference?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then on river, yeah, I think you just have a clear check. You're winning against tons of villains range. You make very few better hands fold by betting, although you might make some fold. But yeah, definitely check is going to be highest EV on river. So yeah, well played hand. But I do think that your range on the Jack XX does want to bet really, really often because villain just doesn't have a lot of Jack X here, and you just have a lot of fold equity on this spot. And you have a hand that likes fold equity and is only betting third pot, right? So the main bit of coaching there is not to lock yourself into hyperpolarization too soon in a hand or feel like you have to check the middle all the time on the flop when you're playing a B33 strategy. Alright guys, got a different hat, maybe different clothes, don't remember what I was wearing last time, but we are here on a new day because the pool was just dead. We had to call it a day last time, so this is part 2. We are back trying to get some blood from the stone as 25NL ACR Blitz. Shane, are you ready to go? Should we jump back in?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Let's do it.
There's a good rig. So, and when it's ace low low, again, button versus big blind, I usually like to check it back, especially since someone against someone I know is quite aggressive. This guy's a solid rig. So I'm just going to check and let him do his thing. Okay. Now we definitely have to start betting, and I think we would use the large turn probe size. I don't think we do anything crazy like go to E or anything. I think just a B75 is good. Ambitious. We're not folding. This guy we already said he's strong enough to be capable. It's a very big raise size. I think he could still be doing this with flush draws. He's good enough. I think we're ahead of his ace X at this point, so gonna call. Ace Jack's sort of in his range. He should be 3-betting at some clip. He missed his flush over pot. I think we're still good a large percent of the time. I don't think he's doing this with 2-pair. I don't think he's good enough not to overvalue his ace X, so it's a tough one. It's a tough spot. So I just think he's more likely to 3-bet, so I'm gonna call with his good ace.
All right, so we'll take this from the flop. I think this is close to a range check against someone that's not leading, but not quite. So betting a third and checking are both fine. I don't think you have to check here. There's a big difference between someone who is capable of being aggressive in spots where the pool generally isn't, and someone who is over bluffing compared to equilibrium. So these are two really different things, and I would urge you throughout this hand to make a distinction between those two types of read. Capable, in my mind, is a horrible read to make of someone because it doesn't tell you anything about their frequency for bluffing relative to like what matters, which is generally the equilibrium baseline that we're comparing it to, right? Whereas if we say this guy over bluffs a lot in lots of situations where most people don't, then we have a really concrete read that makes us want to call down. Capable is almost like saying I'm going to call in case he's bluffing because it's a possibility. And that's not such a good thought process, right? So capable is one of those things I hear live vloggers say, villain's definitely capable. And I like, that's why I don't watch live vloggers, right? So I want to hit myself in the face. But anyway, we go to the turn here. Villain checks. Villain actually deploys a weapon of war. From weapons of war, you both deploy weapons of war. In this hand, you deploy the Swiss Army knife of delayed c-betting. Episode 2, and villain deploys the turn sniper raise, which I forget which episode that is. It might be episode 7, but I could be wrong. Where he goes for the giant check raise, which is a great way to play semi-bluffs that have reasonable equity. It's an equity-driven spot in theory, and bolts and very good a6. So when we face this, my first instinct is that people don't actually put the flush draw in the checking range very often. They might find this with like 3-4, 5-4 hands like this, gut shot type stuff with a pair. As far as spade goes, I feel like they're usually just leading with that, or check calling like the king jack of spades or something. So right off the bat, I think this is a line that cognitively speaking is taken more often by regs at 25 and L with bolts and really good a6 and straights more than it is with a flush draw. Right, so I'm already a bit concerned on turn that this could be underbluffed. I definitely hard disagree with any thought process that says this guy's good, therefore he's overbluffing. I think that's a ridiculous assumption to make in a spot that is globally really, really underbluffed by everybody. So if the spot is globally very underbluffed, and this is because there's a lot of value hands possible and it's an unnatural way to play air, then even a more aggro person in pool is probably still underbluffing, just not by as much as normal. And you see that all the way up in mass data, right? You get an underbluff spot at like 25 NL, and then it's just a bit less underbluffed at 100 NL, for example. So yeah, continuing on turn, it's probably all right, and theoretically it's the done thing with an ace. You've redraw to boats and all of that sort of stuff. So I don't think it's like egregious to call a turn raise. I do think you have a bluff catcher though. I'd be very surprised. I think you said something about him having a weaker ace, like we beat his ace X. I'd be very surprised if anyone competent is check raising big with ace 4 or ace 6 here or something. It's just a terrible play. And if Willem was doing that, I'd be saying he's like a fish, actually. So I think you have a bluff catcher. I think you need to establish that firmly at the start and then not use reasons like I'm beating his ace X to call, because I don't think this is a weaker ace ever. I don't even think this is an ace really very often. I think it's mostly just bolts and straights plus for value. So good to define our hand like that. Any comments so far, or shall we go to river?
No, let's go to river.
Okay. On the river, we face an overbet again in a node that I think is a bit underbluffed on turn, and villain knows most of your range is ace X here as well. So I think the pool is underbluffing here with the overbet so grossly in this line of giant check raise and then overbet river. It's such an unnatural line that even the more aggressive regs are going to be underbluffing for the most part. So without some extremely unique player read, you know, beyond just this guy's better than average or he's less comfortable to play against than average, we should be folding. Another thing I would say is that there are hardly any good regs at 25 and L. It's all relative. So just because someone's a bit better than the normal nittiness or the normal fishiness that goes on doesn't make them some sicko crusher that's like finding the 5-4 here in this spot or whatever they need to find to make you indifferent. You have a bluff catcher. Spade's going to give up a lot if it's even taking this line on turn, because that's how people think. And the bluffs they have to find here are pretty niche, and you know they have to find a lot of them when they're going for overbet in a spot where they still have tons of straights and bolts in their range. They have ace 5, ace 3, 4 deuce suited maybe, pocket 3s, pocket 5s, ace jack sometimes, ace queen very rarely, but not never. Like there's enough value that there needs to be a ton of bluffs being found for this sizing for you to be indifferent with a bluff catcher. So don't call a bluff catcher against a line like this at 25 and L ever. There is almost no skill level read that would make this okay. Even playing like 500 NL, I'd still expect most regs to be underbluffing this node.
You think it'd be any different if I was UTG, like I'm button in this case. Do you think, I think for UTG, it definitely applies that would be an underbluffed spot. Do you think there's any more bluffs happening, big blind versus button here, or it's just the same no matter what for this pool?
Generally speaking, yes, there's more bluffs button versus big blind, but that's nowhere near sufficient to sway it to being a call on the river. Like you might say against under the gun, it would be even worse, right? Or something like that. I also think this is the sort of node where it's not even necessarily true, because the line is so convoluted and niche that like I don't know that people are even considering position by that point when they check raise turn huge here. I think they just have it a lot, or they rarely have some 5-4 type hand. I don't think they're less likely to play the value hand that way against under the gun as they are button. I don't think they're particularly less likely to choose to bluff that way. I don't think this is a spot where the configuration has a big impact. I think if you get like check raised on a flop, that's a spot where the configuration has a bit more impact. I think here it's just the nature of the line is super unnatural to bluff with, and most people just simply don't.
Okay.
But I just watch
Right.
the way you're sort of describing people as good, capable regs. This is language I would just drop. I'd just say, like, this guy's closer to equilibrium than some net. That doesn't mean he's, like, over bluffing. So just making that distinction's the main thing here.
Playing unless he gets raised. Okay. Okay, so 10 high board, I expect to space a small C bet. Against a later position, I'd probably have a check raise, but I think my hand's strong enough just to continue as a call. Larger bet, I still think we're good enough to continue as a call. We're ahead of some of his range still. Hit our pair. Probably calling down now unless he goes absolutely mad. Could polarize here. Normal big bet, so just another call for me. We hit two pair, pretty decent kicker, so I think this will just be a check call. We're gonna lead.
Yep, I think that's worth talking about. Okay, so we face a big bet here, which isn't the expectation. I agree we'll face a small bet more often. What's your sort of read on pool's range when they big bet? How do you think they're constructing that, and how might that be different to how a solver might construct the big bet range?
It's typically more value than bluff, so I'd be more sensitive on certain boards than others, and with certain hands. If I'd had no overs, I would probably, well, I'd definitely fold. But I've also seen people do it with that's just their standard size is large. Some people just their standard size is pot, so it can be anything. I have this guy tagged as a recreational, so I don't think he's construction super properly. So I would expect just it's a normal C bet size for him.
Right, okay. So I think what we could do here is we could zoom out a bit and like take some pool averages. Like there will be people for whom this is just like a button they click and they can have anything. Like that's definitely true. But that's not to say that if you analyzed, 10,000 villains that you wouldn't see certain trends. And I think your first read that pool is generally more equity driven, value heavy is right. Like there are people that do it with anything, but you don't want to take the broad data, which is that this is a bit under bluffed and a bit equity driven, and then like take a few villains that are doing it with anything and say, but because those guys exist, we're going to ignore the broad data, right? So I think it's just a matter of priority here. So I think there's a few other factors that really matter in a spot like this. One is the position of the opener. When they're button, your outs with King Jack are going to be way better. You're going to have more immediate showdown value with the hand, and you're going to be much, much happier and less dominated on a Jack run out or a King run out, right, than you would be against early position. So if you are against button and you're against a big bet from button there, I do think this hand's a pure continue. I think without a diamond against hijack, in theory, against big bet, this is getting close. And I don't think it's a pure continue. And then I would just go with the read that, yeah, while some people are doing this with anything, generally it's stronger than small bet. There are some fish in the pool that are actually small betting the bottom of their range and big betting the bigger stuff and things like that, like a bet size equals hand strength thing. So I think against hijack big bet, we just fold this on flop, just going with our general immediate read about pool. But we do call it in later position and we do call it against smaller bets and stuff like that. But I think flop's a fold here. But as played, yeah, totally fine. No issue with just calling turn. I think this will be a fairly bluff node on the king turn. And on the river, yeah, we do hit two pair. It's kind of a redundant two pair that doesn't really matter. But it is a brick. It is a card that doesn't decrease our hand. It actually increases our hand strength because a lot of rivers were wet and those rivers didn't come. So it's a good card for our equity and absolutely a pure call if we face a bet on river here. Villains play with sixes feels like it's not too bad in early position. It might be a slight overreach there. But I don't think it's like utterly ridiculous to barrel a hand like sixes on the turn there. I do think sixes is probably checking from hijack and maybe betting from under the gun, so it's like a slight overbluff or something. And with the wreck, player, it's probably just a random sprawling merge kind of play, right? Rather than they are aware of where they need to bluff pocket pairs. So yeah, I would just take a note there that that player is merging kind of randomly, and therefore we're going to be way more inclined to favor our absolute hand strength against them in future and just call when we can beat a lot of their merges in many spots. Anything you want to add?
No, I'm a little stationy, so it makes sense that I called it a bit wide. It's something I'm working on.
Yeah, and you can always invent reasons that support it. Like you can always say, well, this could be anything, and that sounds convincing. But could be anything is already included in the overall read that this is a bit stronger. So you have to remember that if you've already made a general read, you don't want to take a specific read that's part of that general read already and then use that, because then you're acting on like the wrong level of specificity when we do that. So that's just a useful like general teaching point, I think. All right, let's jump back in.
7-3 deuce. I think with backdoor heart draw, we can push equity with this, and I think the sizing would be a larger size between 50 and 75. I'll go with 75. Definitely good for range. He could be there with the ace seven, ace deuce, ace three, but I'm going to take it as a card that's good for my range. I have cards that block the best aces, so I'm not going to. I think I would have multiple sizes, like a 75, a 2E, and a check. I'm just going to use this as a 75. I'm not going to overinvest.
Okay, so Shane, I want to check up one thing with you, and this might be me actually venting a frustration that's not really aimed at you, but it's just a general one. But I hear people say this a lot, push equity. And I feel like everyone means something different by this, and I've just never heard a coherent or useful explanation of what that is. So what do you mean when you say push equity? Like, help me understand what that refers to.
I mean that our range is still ahead of his range, like from now until the river. We still have lots of decent outs that can hit, so we want to build a bigger pot by turn and river so that we can get more chips by the end of it.
Okay, so you mean that your range wants to play bigger pots really frequently, so you're going to use a big sizing in the spot to capitalize on the fact that you have that high equity part of your range that wants to play big pots and a lot of runouts. Something like that.
Yeah, and I think this board I would be playing probably big bet or check, and I think I'm bluffing at the moment, but I'm also pushing equity. I still have lots of good outs, so it's a hand that I think I can barrel with easily and build a bigger pot by the end of it.
So
So I
does
don't
pushing
think I,
equity just mean I have equity and I'm increasing the pots, and it's one of the things that facilitates me increasing the pot size is that I have this redraw? Is that what it means?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard people use it in many different ways. I've heard people use that to mean like deny push equity, meaning like deny equity. I've just heard so many things there and it's always confused me. But yeah, I think I agree that this is like a board you can use big bets on because you do want to play huge pots with overpairs and have enough advantage. That's how I put it. And then your hand is obviously okay to bet, okay to check. It's not really a huge deal. So we bet this time and we go on to the turn, which is an ace. I think of the overcards that can land, this is the worst overcard. And that villain does have stuff around the ace on the 7-3 deuce board. They have ace 4, ace 5, 4, 5, some big ace X suited with backdoor. It's a much better card for villain's range than a king, a queen, a jack, or a 10 would be. So in the hierarchy of overcards, it's not the one that's like really pristine for you. That said, when you big bet flop, I think more ace X is folding than normal. It's an okay card for your range. Bluffing with king, queen feels slightly like we are in the realm of negative blockers with the two hearts here and possibly some showdown value with this hand. Not much at all, but a little bit. It feels like the kind of hand that, I don't know, King Queen of Hearts specifically. I think this hand's a pure check at equilibrium because of that. I could be wrong. And I think your bluffs would come primarily here on this turn from stuff like Jack 10 that doesn't block as many of the folds. Queen Jack has a bit less showdown value, and then things like King 4 suited, King 5 suited, like other hands that have gutters, have a 4 or a 5 or something. What do I think about this in real life? I think it's all right. I don't see a huge deviation here though. So I'm guessing this is like maybe a slight mistake to bet the turn with this particular hand. I could be wrong though, so you guys can let me know in the comments if this is ever betting turn. I'd guess it isn't. And yeah, I think that's where I come down on it. Just kind of understanding that like the 10 turn, this is going to be a super high frequency barrel. Or the Jack turn, where you've still got 2 overs and it's less good for villain, really high frequency barrel, and then seeing the aces like the more inferior of the overcard turns on this node. Not to say you can't still be quite aggressive with certain hands. I just think King Queen of Hearts is like more dead now in its outs and maximally blocking a villain's folding range. I don't think it blocks the best aces very well, because I think Ace Queen, Ace King is 3-betting pre. Certainly Ace King is 3-betting pre almost always. Ace Queen will be 3-betting pre a lot as well. So that's another reason why like your Jack 10 might actually be a more useful blocker to top pair here than something like a King would be.
Okay, fair enough.
Cool. All right,
Yeah.
let's sit back in.
All raises. Queen high. I think I'd be doing small bets here. Could just go 3E, but I'm just going to do small bet on flop. Keep his pairs in there. Pairs and flush draws. Not super good for the flush draws that stuck around. I think we still bet because we don't want to allow a 4th diamond to come out. So I'll just be 75.
Yep, worth a look. Okay, so there's not a ton wrong with your play here, but I do think there's some critique that we can give on the thought process. So on the flop, diamond draw is never folding, right? So when you say I'm gonna bet small to get value from flush draws that'll stick around, they'll also stick around if you bet big. They're not a big part of ranges in this configuration though at all. Especially if you had the ace of diamonds, it'd be an even smaller part. When you bet the flop and villain has a flush draw, whatever sizing you go, it's bad when it comes on the turn, and they will always take all of their flush draws to the turn. So getting anyone off of a flush draw on the flop, that can't really happen. It's really just not a hand I'd care about, because a flush draw is quite close to you in equity, and therefore it's not the sort of hand that you're getting lots of EV by betting against. The reason that it's good to bet often here with aces on the flop is more that you're crushing 10s and jacks and queen X and all of these kind of continues. The flush draws are the least relevant hand from an EV standpoint, actually. So your focus shouldn't really be on it when you're thinking about this spot. When we bet and get called here and we go to the diamond turn, villain's main calling region on the turn will be 10s with a diamond, jacks with a diamond, that kind of thing. So again, when you bet the turn here, those hands are not meant to fold. So there's no stopping a 4th diamond from coming, because if the 4th diamond comes and villain has it, it's bad that you bet the turn. If the 4th diamond doesn't come, that's good for you because you were able to get called by that hand that had the diamond. So if anything, I would rephrase to saying we can value bet because villain calls with pocket pair plus diamond, and because the river is usually not a diamond. It's not that we're forcing them out of the pot when they have 1 diamond here. So you're thinking about protecting against textures. You don't protect against textures, you protect against hands. You protect equity. And villain isn't folding that region here for the most part. Maybe if he has like 7s with a diamond, they will at some frequency, right? Not saying never, but it's not the primary reason for betting. So checking this turn is also very, very fine. Like there's no way that this has to be a bet. And the reason is that aces just has dropped in equity now. It's no longer craving as big a pot without the ace of diamonds as it would have on the 4 of clubs turn. So if the turn is the 4 of clubs, You bet because your hand needs to pot build and wants to play three streets for value on loads of runouts. But now the runouts where you want to play three streets are massively diminished. There's hardly any of them. And you might already question whether it was too thin to bet turn jam river, this SPR. You might question that, right, without the ace of diamonds in your hand. So you need to start thinking less about stopping things you don't want to experience from happening and more about your equity. And in grade 1 lecture 2 we talk about mandatory, prohibited, and optional value bets. And on the turn this is at most an optional value bet because your equity is dropped. So I want equity to become your primary thought, not protection. Protection's a secondary reason for betting. So I think we can just restructure your thought process a bit in that respect. Make sense? Any thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think I was taking strange to think this way, but I was taking a defensive lens with aces. When my equity is still decent, I can definitely still handle a check and a potential value bet on river. So I agree. I was looking at it wrong.
Yeah, it's like you have enough equity to value bet, but not so much that you have to value bet. So your hand is like somewhere in there. And then you could think, well, against pool, how often am I getting three streets? And I think the answer is like not super often. Therefore, is it better to bet turn or is it better to bet river? Try and figure that one out. And if you're not sure, then it's unlikely to be a big deal. But the point is that it's kind of criminal not to bet aces here on the deuce of clubs turn, but it's not criminal not to bet aces on the eight of diamonds turn. So it's about getting that the right way around. All right, Shane, thank you very much for coming on. I think my main things I would say is that you can do with thinking about EV a bit more. You can do with prioritizing the basics more. I think you are running before you can walk in some spots. Like your thought process gets overly elaborate, complicated, gets overly specific and kind of extreme with the reads you're making on opponents. I think get yourself back to basics. If you're thinking about value betting, make sure that you're considering your equity. Do you have to value bet? Could you check? Is it mandatory? Is it optional? Is it prohibited? If you're thinking about bluffing, assess your fold equity. Just make sure you're doing all the basic things right before you get too bogged down in range versus range thinking. Make sure that you're always focused on EV. That's the main thing. If I was going to prescribe you something to watch, I'd say go and watch the True EV series on Carrot Corner in the subscriber library. Watch it from start to finish, all 10 episodes, and that'll be really like up your street in terms of what your game needs right now. You do not need more complex ideas. I know you told me you've got Weapons of War and you've been watching it and enjoying it, and I'm not surprised that you enjoy it, having seen the way you think about the game. You like gadgets and toys and tools, and fair enough, so do we all. But I would shelf it for now, and I would actually watch grade 1 of the Carrot Poker School if you haven't already, or again if you have already, and the True EV series, and only then would I start watching Weapons of War.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad we got the hands that we did because it captured me in I guess my true form in my leakiest spots, especially that overvaluing the trips on a paired board. Like that's a total leak that I have. I think last time we met, I had the pocket nines where I hit the nuts on the river, and you could sense that it was. Yeah, it's easy when I have the nuts, right? But I think there was still some leakiness that came through in my presentation, and you had some good feedback and thoughts on that. So I think we captured some good hands that find me in my weakest points.
Yeah, I just think you should have less thoughts in your thought process. I think right now too many bad thoughts are getting through the filter, and it's about having a tighter filter with less in it and more quality over quantity. Because it feels like the floodgates are kind of open and random thoughts can infiltrate your thought process at random times, and a lot of them are unhelpful or not that relevant. And it's about actually like stripping that back and having less in there. So yeah, okay, very common problem though. Very like common case, not at all a unique you thing, but very common thing for a lot of people watching as well. Hopefully this episode of Poker Inferno has been useful, guys. And don't forget that the Golden Carrot is out at carrotcorner.com if you are interested in the Carrot Poker School, Weapons of War, all these courses you hear us talk about, lifetime access to the subscription service and anything we produce thereafter in that, then yeah, pick up the Golden Carrot. It's our best ever value product, and it's definitely the thing that you should get if you are wanting to take the plunge, so to speak, and invest in your poker education. And we'll be back with episode 10 of Poker Inferno, where we're bringing Jess, who is a guest on, who's the student on the second ever season of Coaching Journeys from Stalling to Mauling back onto the show. She's going to do a Poker Inferno with us. So that's going to be episode 10. And yeah, we'll probably take a little pause with Poker Inferno there and bring you some other content too. All right, Shane, thanks again, man. And thank you guys for watching.
Yes, sir.
Catch you later.